You're on mute, Priya.
Hi, everybody. I think we should probably get started as people are, quite a few people have already joined. So welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us for the Active Energy Precincts webinar, the final webinar for the Yarra Ranges region, where we'll be touching on the feasibility outcomes from the project. Firstly, I'd like to and the project team would like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land we're gathered today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are joining us from today on this webinar, and also acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating as well. So thanks again for joining us. A bit of an overview of what we'll be covering today. We'll be having a bit of an overview of the project and the solutions of the Active Energy Precincts project. We'll be touching on some of the community engagement outcomes that have occurred throughout the project. And we'll also be going through, I guess, critically some of the modelling, the approach we've adopted for this project and some of the outcomes that we are currently fine-tuning, and then look at how the community can understand the roles and functions that they can be involved in these systems, and the next steps communities in the Yarra Ranges will need to consider in taking this system forward. And of course, today's webinar is being recorded, so we'll be making it available after this event. But we will have a Q&A at the end of the session, so feel free to use the Q&A function on your screens to send through any questions via the chat, and we can look at answering them during the course of the webinar, and also picking out a few to discuss at the end of the session. So today we're being joined by a couple of great panel members who've been part of our project team. I'll throw over to Amy to start and introduce herself.
Thanks, Priya. So I'm Amy Gregorovich. I'm Yarra Ranges Council Energy Resilient Communities Officer in our climate action team. So work on these microgrid feasibility studies in collaboration with Monash University and some other renewable energy initiatives. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. And we're also being joined today by Faisal, Hussain from Birdwood. Hi, Faisal.
Hey, thanks, Priya. Yeah, so just to give you an overview about myself. So I've done my master's in renewable and sustainable energy from Monash, and I'm now working at Birdwood Energy, where we pretty much do a lot of work with batteries and optimization and modeling of such batteries. We also look at how adding additional solar to customers and retrofitting that with batteries would look like, and so we're basically partnering with the Monash initiative to see how the feasibility would work out. Yeah, thanks, Priya.
Thanks, Faisal. So a lot of you who are joining us today would have already seen quite a bit of our work and been involved in some of our engagements. But I just thought it'd be worth touching on, I guess, the project objective and sort of how it came to be. I guess the project came about based on Monash's own net zero journey and how we could assist and enable others in the community in making their own energy transition. And I guess the primary objective of the project was to enable people or empower people to compare, I guess, an individual pathway where people are looking at their own household or organization needs and balancing the costs and whether to maybe invest in solar or a battery on their house or business, and then juggle that with the resilience or reliability needs they might have, as well as emissions and of course the costs of those overall requirements. And cost is always always a factor when we're talking about energy, especially at the moment. And so I guess to do that, we really wanted to provide an understanding of solutions such as microgrids, that would enable people to consider that community pathway, which would hopefully, as this feasibility studies will show, allow people to meet some of their own individual needs, but as well as providing the greater benefits for the rest of the community. So in the Active Energy Precincts project, the solution we've been talking about in the recent engagements, we've referred to them as local energy systems, and it's just sort of be worthwhile touching on what these are. I guess essentially they're microgrid systems that are looking at localizing energy functions of the electricity network, and by leveraging renewable technologies and battery technologies that are available today to localize these functions in a accessible form for the community. These systems will still be grid connected, so you'll still need an interface and the ability to integrate with the network. The studies have not been looking at, I guess, islanding whole communities or whole townships in very much grid connected systems, but also, I guess, as a result, then allowing individuals to maximize their own needs. So if you have a look at the graph at the moment, or the image got on the your screens at the moment, it's moving from that traditional electricity network where I guess you generate off-site, generally fossil fuels, and those are transmitted and distributed to generally consumers in the network, and moving to that more modern form where consumers have become prosumers, where they have the ability to generate and store energy on their own site, but also the ability to have larger scale solar systems and battery storage functions. The solution that we've utilized is a hub and spoke approach, and focusing on, I guess we've termed it a community-led design, where we've focused on those three drivers at the top of your screen of community-based resilience, increase renewable energy for communities, and at the same time looking to reduce energy costs. I think worthwhile just touching on what we mean by community-based resilience in this context is the ability for communities to access energy during, I guess, large-scale resilience events such as bushfires or storms, and of course Yarra Ranges, I think, more familiar, unfortunately, with those instances than most. So in the hub and spoke model, when we refer to a hub, we're talking about a location or a number of sites within the community that are geographically co-located. So they're in very close proximity to each other, ideally next door to each other. They might already have generation and battery assets already installed or deployed on their site, but critically they have the ability to deploy more on those sites. And one of the things we've looked at with hubs in particular, especially with that resilience need in mind, is the ability to island from the network, and thereby allowing them to operate when the rest of the electricity network is been taken out for some reason. When we refer to spokes in this project, we've been talking about individual sites, and there can be obviously your residential household or any small business or other commercial sites, and they can be located within the energy precinct. Now, when we sort of refer to that energy precinct and the boundaries, it's really a soft boundary that I guess is determined as we work through some of the details we'll define in the outcomes. And yes, the spokes will also be potentially a source of renewable energy for the system, as well as have the ability to store some of that energy locally. So with Yarra Ranges, we've been looking at Healesville and Yarra Junction, and we've worked closely with Amy and her colleagues in the initial stage to identify particular sites that could be become hubs. And the two hubs that we've identified for Healesville are centred around the Memo Link facilities in Healesville, as well as second hub being around the Beechwood Bakery and Innocent Bystander location. Through that initial work with council and as well as with some of the local stakeholders, we identified these sites as being valued for resilience, and they could be utilised as a staging area during those resilience events. So hence why we've narrowed down this feasibility study to these two locations. And another reason these sites have been chosen is due to their varied demand profiles of the various buildings and infrastructure on those sites. And through our work, own work at Monash, we know that having that varied energy use at a hub site provides the sort of anchor that, from a commercial perspective, enables these systems to become feasible, and then also allows you to then expand and scale up. So the reason we've looked at multiple hubs is so that the community can, once, I guess, they review these findings, understand their options, but also have some comparison points, but also in the future to have the ability to scale and, I guess, repeat the process for other sites. So in Yarra Junction, we have identified the primary hub being around the aquatic centre and the other sporting facilities, as well as the Yarra Burn Centre in Yarra Junction, being a primary sort of resilience value for the community there. The second hub we've identified as a more commercial sort of based site, with the shopping centre being the primary demand, but with still community aspects with the library and Yarra Family Centre. So as I said, there was quite significant community engagement carried out to sort of identify these sites and start narrowing down some of the understandings for the feasibility study. And to do that, there was obviously significant community engagement. So to touch on some of that, we'll call on Amy to give you some information around that.
Thanks, Priya. Hi all. So yeah, community engagement has been a priority for this project, and the project team has been really focused on getting input at the various stages of the project, with different stakeholders in Healesville and Yarra Junction involved. To begin with, this included approximately 20 one-on-one meetings with key stakeholders, which I'll detail on the next slide. We pushed out a survey in early 2022, which asked questions around local priorities and interest in community energy solutions. And we had 42 residents and small business owners reply to that survey, which we were really impressed with. Across the project timeline, we ran 3 focus groups, which helped the project team test different modelling scenarios and content for this webinar and the past webinar we did. And more recently, we ran 2 community workshops in Healesville and Yarra Junction, which are pictured there on the right-hand side, which helped the project team test ideas around community interest in a future microgrid being operated and or owned by a community or part-owned. And finally, our technical partners at Birdwood Energy have conducted site assessments at 15 key buildings to understand what would be required for those buildings to participate in a future microgrid with regards to solar and battery installs, alongside things like switchboard upgrades and things like that. Can you go to the next slide, please, Priya? So as mentioned, there have been a number of amazing community stakeholders involved in this project, with some of them detailed here. They've included community support representatives, aged care facilities, RSLs, building managers for shopping centres, our larger commercial sites in town, and also our libraries. And at Yarra Ranges Council, we're super excited to delve into the feasibility reports once they're finalised, to understand what microgrid models are financially feasible in both townships and deliver the community benefits we hope to achieve. These works are all part of some of the wider strategies we're working towards, specifically actions detailed in our Livable Climate Plan, and more recent work centred around transitioning council services to renewable energy as soon as possible. We're really excited because our learning from Hillsville and Yarra Junction, the feasibility studies, have shaped how we've launched our next microgrid project in Monbulk, which is happening as we speak. We've got a workshop coming up in May, and the report is due in early 2024. So we're really keen to see how these findings can be replicated in different local contexts, but how they differ with different communities. A specific learning for this project has influenced all of the work we do in the climate action team here at Yarra Ranges Council. And that's truly been the value of collaborating with community representatives on innovative projects like this, and the importance of opening conversations with agency bodies such as AusNet from the onset of the project. So as a whole, we're super excited to understand the role that local government could play in taking these projects forward alongside our really passionate community members. So I'll pass back to Priya to outline some of the findings from our workshops. Thanks, Priya.
Thanks, Amy. As Amy mentioned, we had a number of workshops that I'm sure many of you on the webinar were involved in. So I thought it'd be really useful for you to sort of see some of the feedback we had from those workshops, and also pointing out that some of this was also fed into that analysis that we'll touch on later on with the feasibility study. So during those workshops, we looked at, what do people want from a local energy system, and in Yarra Ranges, it was very clear that community resilience was a priority, and understandably, I guess, based on the feedback we received, but also, I guess, access to more renewables and the interest in community batteries was strong. Just to note that these workshops were held, I guess, late last year. So there's been quite a lot of, I guess, action and activity around community batteries lately as well. So I'm sure that's also generated further interest. One of the key questions and items we were looking to test during those workshops is like people's interest in participation and what they would be willing to pay to be involved in this kind of system. And I guess really hearteningly, most people who responded were willing to pay more than they currently are from their energy retailer for additional benefits. And the primary benefit that we discussed was around having access to that resilience supply during those resilience events. And I guess Faisal will touch on what the modelling is sort of indicating at this stage, but I think it's quite heartening, some of the results that we're seeing. I guess we do realise that a lot of the engagement we've had with yourselves and the people who've been involved have been with, I guess, parts of the community that are very engaged with energy and the concepts that we've been talking about. So we are, I guess, aware that this is only reflective of a portion of the community, and we need to sort of, I guess, test that further as we go through the process. Other parts of the workshop that were of significance for what we're talking about today was around governance preferences and community ownership. And this was really around understanding who would be making decisions and who would be interested in owning this organisation or this and overseeing the system. And really, I guess, a lot of people were looking for more information on both fronts, but there was a significant level of community interest, whether it be purely community-led on both fronts or a hybrid with some other third party involved. And I guess once the feasibility studies are finalised, there will be, I guess, the information that people will be looking for and sources or avenues to access more information around some of these, I guess, sometimes complex concepts. So I guess getting into the meat of today's session was really around modelling and what the modelling is starting to indicate for Yarra Ranges. So I thought it'd be worth touching on the approach we've taken for modelling, and Faisal will touch on, I guess, the details in terms of the outputs of that analysis to date. But as you can see on your screens at the moment, we've got a few different approaches that we've taken, or scenarios, I should say, in the approach. We've done some analysis on a base case, and this is really around individual actions. So think of it as a homeowner or an organization carrying out those decisions, whether they put solar or battery on their own site, and what the payback would look like if they were to do it themselves. So we've done that really to form a comparison point to the microgrid or local energy systems that we are looking at. The second scenario we're looking at is what we've termed a single hub, multiple participant. And this is really, I guess, what we've referred to in all our engagements, where you're looking at a hub that has renewable energy and energy storage capacity, interacting with other residents within the community. So in Healesville's case, this could be the Mimo and Links and shopping centre site having larger scale solar and battery systems that people within the community can then access via the contractual means that we will outline. So this single hub would have an islanding point that will enable that hub site to operate during those times when the energy network, electricity network, is taken out for reasons such as bushfires or storms, and allow the community to access that. The third scenario is having multiple hubs and multiple participants. So the multiple hub component is really around how you could potentially have more than one of these sites, whether it be in the first instance or as you look to scale in the future, and how that could essentially impact your costs and hopefully drive those costs down. What it does also mean is that you could be, or you will be, servicing more parts of the community with these hub sites during resilience events. What it doesn't mean is that these sites, I guess, are operating or interacting with each other during those resilience events. They're really still separate in the instances and rely on the network configurations for how they operate. Some of the sensitivities that have been tested and included in the modelling just referred to at the bottom of your screen. So we've looked at scale, and that's really about how many people could be involved in the system, and I guess ideally, or essentially, what is required as a minimum to ensure that the system is commercially viable. Understanding how much resilience it'll deliver, so whether there's a premium required for resilience or it can be incorporated as your base case scenario. Understanding how demand increases over time with items such as electrification, people getting off gas, EVs being used more and more, how that could impact the outcomes, and also just general system efficiencies. So an easy example of that is looking at solar and how efficiently the solar systems could be generating. So obviously during a resilience event, for example, you're not going to be expecting a 100% solar generation if it's, as a result of a bushfire. There could be some impact from, I guess, smoke and the like. So those kind of sensitivities have been included in the analysis. To talk to some of the detail of that analysis, though, I'll pass it over to Faisal. Talk you through that. Thanks, Faisal.
Thanks, Priya. So just taking you through the two models that we've done for Healesville and for Yarra Ranges. The main thing that I wanted to touch on was how we did the modeling first. So we first actually had a look at the the past interval data of these sites to get us to a good or a reasonable outcome that we could then utilize. We also decided that for us to reach this resilience capability, which we got from the community interaction. So to get the resilience capability and to make these systems feasible and commercially viable, we needed to add a little bit of extra solar panels and batteries into the system. So for Healesville Hub 1, we found that adding around 1,050 kilowatts of additional PV and an additional battery of 150 to 600 kilowatt hours would actually make it feasible. So adding this additional infrastructure would come at a cost, and that cost was estimated to be around $2.5 million. This cost also includes the infrastructure, that is the installation cost, the equipment cost, and the cost to upgrade any networks to make it suitable for a resilience event. And we found that when we did the analysis for this, the savings that the PV and the battery would bring would be around 9 years. There's still some analysis that needs to be done for the Hub 2 site, and we are in the process of finalizing this. But the key points and the key takeaways that you can see on the left of the slide are that in adding these additional values, we can decrease the cost to the customers of the sites by reducing their tariffs or almost keep it at the same rate. We can increase the resilience by about 6 hours when we use PV, and adding the battery can increase that potentially by another 5 to 6 hours. And it is important to note that in this case, the batteries have been modeled so that it is commercially viable as well. And these can be scaled furthermore to provide a higher amount of resilience. And it also depends on the amount of actual load that is being consumed. We were able to offset around 1,900 tons of carbon per year by the scenario of having this microgrid. Yeah, if you could move on to the next slide, Priya. Yeah. Similarly, for the Yarra Junction, in the 2 hubs that we modeled, we found that in the first hub, adding about 180 kilowatts of PV and a BESS of 50 to 200 kilowatts. The reason why we didn't add too much of PV here was that because there's already solar installed on a lot of the sites here, and looking at their data, it was feasible to only install a small amount. For this, we found that the project cost would be around 0.9 million and would bring a payback in about 20 years. Whereas for Hub 2, we realized that we needed a much greater amount of PV of about 1,020 kilowatts and a bigger battery for it to be commercially viable and provide the resilience that was required for the hub. The battery size that we needed was around 380 kilowatt, 1520 kilowatt hours, and a project cost of about 3.4 million with a much better payback of 15 years. Again, in this case, we found that we were able to, even though we were adding quite a bit of infrastructure, we were able to bring down the energy tariffs for the customers when they're interacting between each other using the microgrid. And we expect the resilience with the PV to be around 6 hours. And this can be increased by using the battery to 9 to 10 hours, depending on what the load was. Of course, we still need to finalize all the modeling and these are just indicative numbers, but we were able to see that the emissions saved or the emissions offsetted by the microgrid was around 1,500 tons as well. Yeah, over to you, Priya.
Great, thanks, Faisal. As I mentioned, feel free to send through any questions you might have as we go through the webinar on the chat, and we will be able to get through them at the end of the session. Now, as we've worked through in the workshops at the end of last year and the engagements we've had recently, we've talked about, I guess, the different roles and functions that people can play in these systems, and I guess some of the decisions that people need to make. And I just thought it'd be worth teasing out some of those roles and functions for people. And I guess the key thing in some of the decisions that people need to make is really based around risk appetite, and it's really probably more in relation to the ownership and governance side of things. There's certain functions that really lend themselves to third party providers, and this is where delivery partners will start being considered within the system. So as we look through this graphic on the screen, your system participant is really referring to people who are participating in the system. This could be your households and businesses, and then they can consider owning their own assets on their own house, obviously, but also have the independence to carry out their own ownership and governance decisions for themselves, but can also be involved in, I guess, the overall system requirements. The delivery and partner roles here, and as you can see by the note, it can be provided by one or multiple providers, and these are really specialist roles. So when we look at functions such as data and orchestration, market and billing, and operations and maintenance, they're very technical roles which require specific subject matter expertise in each area, and can become quite complex and nuanced. And they will also have certain requirements such as OHS, legislative and regulatory requirements, as well as potentially legal requirements such as licensing. So generally speaking, those functions in those areas tend to be delivered by third parties who have those specialized skill sets. And we've touched on this in the project before. We've had Mitch O'Neill from Grids speak on our last webinar around microgrid technologies and the kind of questions people need to ask different vendors, and that report will be also made available with these feasibility studies at the end of this month. And lastly, the last function here is around the ownership and governance decision and that a community would need to make, and that's the community organisation we refer to in this, and how they, I guess, proceed forward with this system, and the decisions they need to make for who is involved and how it's taken forward. So we'll touch on that as part of the next steps. I guess this project, I guess, is focused on that first stage of the microgrid journey, which is the planning stage. And so the feasibility study, which is the output of this project, there'll be a feasibility study for each precinct, with obviously the fine detail that accompanies the high-level summary that Faisal's provided you. That will be made available at the end of this month. And I guess that enables communities to become investment ready. And so these are the next steps people need to sort of consider as they work through the feasibility study. And it's really an inverse of that roles and functions diagram that we just had up. We really need to start at that community organisation level and establish an informal community organisation. So this can be, I guess, different in each precinct or region. It can be a pre-existing group or body, such as the council or a local energy group, or a combination of these stakeholders. I guess the Yarra Ranges is quite lucky to have a number of options open to them, with the council willing to play a strong role in facilitating that. And so once that community organisation comes together, that allows them or provides them the agency to start assessing the feasibility study on behalf of the community and making some decisions. So it allows them to, I guess, first decide on which option out of the feasibility study would best suit the community to take as a first step, and then allow it to start looking at, I guess, the process that they would need to take in terms of identifying delivery partners, identifying how many people would be involved, and start actually, I guess, doing that groundwork that would require people being signed up to this system. And then at some point in the process, the community organisation will need to become formalised and become a legal entity. This will allow it to sort of make decisions on those ownership and governance requirements that we've touched on. The other component that the community organisation will need to do is identify source and source funding to allow you to implement the system. So funding could come from a range of sources. It could come from fundraising from within the community or private investors, but also communities have, I guess, the opportunity to access government funding. And this particular feasibility study has been tailored to meet the federal government's ARENA's RAMP funding. So ARENA is a federal government's renewable energy agency, and they've released fundings for these kind of systems via their microgrid pilot program. So grant funding such as this usually have conditions that need to be met. In the case of the RAMP funding, you need to have a feasibility study to be completed to allow you to qualify for the funding. So hence why this feasibility study has been tailored for their needs. And the funding is also focused on microgrid systems. It wouldn't fund, I guess, a system that is not a microgrid in itself, like a behind the meter installation or community battery. This is specifically for microgrid systems. This funding also provides match funding. So what that means is if a community qualifies, they will need to source 50% of the funds themselves. So this is some of the decisions that and processes that a community organisation would need to take into account for their next steps as after they've reviewed these outputs. And then that would allow them to go forward and make those applications and start implementing the microgrid system and start, I guess, narrowing down some of the questions and some of the details, such as cost, and then start actually implementing and building the system. So as I mentioned, this is a high-level summary of the feasibility study. A lot of the detail will be available in the published reports, which will be available at the end of the month. And we'll definitely be sharing that with all the participants when it's available, along with this webinar recording. And so that takes us to the end of today's presentation, and I'll throw it open to the audience to see if there are any questions. And we've got a couple, and I think we've got one from Julian. Thanks for the question, Julian. Faisal, this is probably one for you in terms of impact or the implications to the payback period. What impacts the payback period, and in relation to here as well? Yep.
Yeah, that is a good question. So the question was that we've got different payback periods for different hub sites, and what is the main drivers for that payback period? So the main things that there are a couple of things that we focused on when we were looking at this payback, right? But the main thing over here was looking at the different sites and how much interaction would the microgrid provide between each site, and what additional value the added PV and BESS would provide. So if there is additional PV, we would see how much of the imports from the actual grid has been reduced, and how the battery is also helping in that. And the second very important factor that drives the payback for both is the actual energy tariffs as well. So if the energy tariffs on one of the sites is higher, or one of the hubs is higher than the other, that potentially drives the payback a lot faster, because you're actually offsetting that much energy rate. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, there are quite a bit of drivers to it, but the main ones being how much energy is flowing between each site, and what is the price that they're actually paying for the energy, and if that can be reduced.
Thanks, Faisal. Amy, I know you mentioned the work that's commencing in Yarra Ranges at Monbulk with, I guess, an extension of this work. I guess this work in the Active Energy Precincts project was the first step. It was somewhat exploratory in nature, and so there've been a lot of lessons learned. Maybe for the benefit of the audience, do you think that there's already been an improvement in terms of from what we've learned and how we're applying that in Monbulk?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I mentioned in our summary, like that collaboration with community energy groups and then community sport bodies and things like that has been very important for AEP, but it's definitely been a priority in Monbulk as well. Our residents in Monbulk are super keen and really excited to see what we can do with the project. A major learning of AEP has been the importance of open communication and collaboration with AusNet from the onset. We've unfortunately experienced a couple of delays because of difficulties associated with that, but we've already seen some really positive outcomes with Monbulk in understanding the ability to connect two buildings together, the Monbulk Living and Learning Centre and the Monbulk Football Pavilion. And we've already been able to have a chat with AusNet and understand the technical limitations and the financial implications of connecting those two buildings, which has been really exciting. And I think as a whole, we're trying to shape how we do our engagement. So we did the survey similar, but with our workshops, trying to engage with people who aren't already thinking in this energy space to get a bit more of diversity of opinions. So collaborating with different council teams and different events happening in Monbulk to get those perspectives. But I think we'll continue kind of adapting the Monbulk project plan as we go and as we work through the findings from AEP. But yeah, very exciting.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I've got another question in relation to people participating. Is it possible for people outside of the hub and spokes to be able to participate in the microgrid? The short answer, or the simple answer, is yes. It's really around how that initial precinct is defined. And it's really a soft boundary because all the participants outside of the hub itself will be virtual. So it's not reliant on the network configuration for people to participate. Thanks for that question, Karen. So Faisal, just had a question that I thought it might be worth teasing out for the benefit of the audience around network tariffs and the impact of network tariffs on the modelling and I guess on the viability of a system.
Yes. So yeah, that again. So if we look at network tariffs actually play a huge impact on the modeling, because they are pretty much a majority of the cost to each site, and in our modeling itself, what we are looking at is how we can reduce this network tariff or pretty much drop it as much as possible to create a secondary localized network tariff for the sites that are interacting between the microgrid. And that would then enhance the amount of savings or drive the payback for each of these sites. And yeah, so the network tariffs basically are a huge cost, which we are trying to reduce by using a microgrid. And the more the site interactions between each microgrid increases, that means that we can drop that network tariff as much as possible by creating a secondary localized tariff that can be charged to each of these customers for their interactions.
Great, thanks, Faisal. I've got a question from Rebecca regarding the level of involvement, specifically community involvement and time you need for the project. I guess that's not an easy one to answer, Rebecca, but I mean, obviously there will be, it'll be different depending on the location. But in terms of involvement, there will need to be some significant involvement, and hence why that organisation at some point needs to become formal. And there's a lot of, I guess, legal and regulatory sort of requirements that they need to deal with in terms of decisions. And obviously just setting up those kind of organizations or vehicles are quite involved in themselves. But it is also worth noting that the funding opportunities that exist, like this specific one that we've mentioned with ARENA, is open till the end of next year. So there's time for communities to, I guess, digest this information, and there's time for communities to come together and make these decisions. I guess that is definitely a plus, but there will be significant sort of requirement in terms of time to enable it to proceed. So a question for Faisal. In terms of localized tariff, do you need a common retailer or a retail license for participants? I think you partially answered that, Faisal, but we're just teasing out in terms of that license bit.
Yeah. So basically, for the purpose of the modeling, we are looking to have a common retailer, just so that we know what flows are there between each other and have a single rate. But it is more work to be done, of course, and it's probably it's a future scope to what can be done if there are multiple retailers and how that needs to be tackled.
Great, thanks, Faisal. So with that, I think I'm conscious of time, and thank you for everyone who's joined us today. It's a busy time of day with school pickups and all, so greatly appreciated. You can look out for, I guess, definitely the feasibility studies that will be published shortly via the Yarra Ranges website on this project, as well as the website that we shared in this webinar. We'll be sharing this recording shortly with everybody who's been involved and registered, and it will also be available through the normal project channels. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Amy or myself, and we can definitely try and facilitate. So thanks a lot, and we look forward to hearing more of your questions and seeing you shortly.